Anyway. Yeah. Okay.
Almost there. Okay, now you're live, Chair Kuznick.
Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome to the special meeting of the Planning Commission, March 15th. And at this time, prior to the roll call, the time is 5:01. Prior to the roll call, the city attorney would like to make an announcement to the Planning Commission regarding the teleconferencing of this meeting. Ms. Poon.
Thank you, Chair Kuznick. Prior to roll call, I would like to make clear for the record of this meeting, and it should be reflected in the minutes, that the governor has issued executive orders relaxing the requirements pertaining to remote meetings under the Brown Act. The executive orders authorize this Planning Commission to hold public meetings by teleconference during the COVID-19 crisis. I previously went over the specific provisions of the Brown Act that have been temporarily amended or suspended in order to allow for this meeting to take place by teleconference, and this meeting will comply with all such provisions. Madam Recording Secretary, it would now be appropriate for you to conduct roll call, after which I'd ask the chair to recognize me in order to confirm certain matters for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards?
Present.
Commissioner Marks?
Here.
Commissioner Wallace?
I'm here.
Vice Chair Alpert?
Here.
And Chair Kuznick?
I am here.
Thank you.
We return to you, Ms. Poon. You may proceed with confirming matters for the record.
Thank you again, Chair Kuznick. I would now like to ask the chair, the vice chair, and the other commission members 3 questions. Rather than ask you to respond separately to these questions, I'll ask all 3. And if the answer is yes to all 3, please say yes and physically raise your hand. Question number 1, can you hear me well? Question number 2, have you been able to hear all previous speakers, including the roll call, clearly? And question 3, are you satisfied, based on facial or voice recognition or otherwise, that everyone here representing themselves to be a commission member is actually the person they are representing themselves to be? Looking for hands and yeses, please.
Yes.
Here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Rick's muted, but thanks.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Seeing all hands raised, the record should reflect that I have received affirmative answers from each commission member present to all 3 questions. That all commission members have indicated they are able to hear each other in these proceedings clearly. And no commission members expressed doubt that each and every commission member participating by teleconference is in fact the commission member they are representing themselves to be. And finally, I would now like to advise the chair and the commission members and the recording secretary that any votes taken during the teleconference portion of this meeting must be taken by roll call. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. All right, we go to item 2.1, the housing element, continued housing site inventory discussion. And we have a staff report by Ms. Yee, Senior Planner.
Thank you and good evening. Hopefully you can see my shared screen here. Tonight we continue our work on the housing sites inventory discussion and want to go over a lot of the work that we've done to get to this point, and then where we stand now in terms of our housing sites inventory. And so some of these slides may be redundant. You may have seen these in previous presentations and at the ad hoc meeting. So I'll be going over them pretty briefly, and then we can discuss more after my presentation. And so just for the benefit of those in the audience, as we all know, we have a regional housing needs allocation for the 2023-2031 cycle, which we refer to as the 6 cycle of 5,111 housing units that the city will need to plan for. In order to meet our RHNA, the sites inventory requires that we look at our existing housing opportunity sites that we have in our 4th and 5th cycle, as well as projects that we've planned and approved that we call pipeline projects. Any accessory dwelling units we think that may be added into the next 8 years. And we look at those numbers and determine if we can adequately meet our 5,111 RENA. If all of those sites combined do not allow for us to meet our RENA, then we need to look at creating additional housing opportunity sites for our 6th cycle. This slide essentially shows that based on the number of approved projects and projected units from our current 5th cycle, we're going to have a shortage of units to meet our RENA. And so our task essentially is with the sites inventory to figure out where opportunity sites can be located in the city to accommodate for this shortage. So we're short about 1,400 units that we need to accommodate out of the 5,111. We also want to maintain a sizable buffer so that as development progresses over the next 8 years, we'll have enough units. If some sites do not develop at the full capacity that we expected, that we'll still have a buffer so that we do not get into a net loss issue. And so that would require us to rezone and have enough housing opportunity sites that can accommodate about 3,500 units. HCD provides some guidance on how cities can determine realistic capacity. It goes into detail in the staff report, but parcels have to be zoned to allow a sufficient density and in order to accommodate the lower income affordability. And so as long as it has a suitable density range that's identified for it, housing opportunity sites are expected under the statutory requirements to be able to accommodate that lower income RENA. Some of those standards include having that minimum density of 20 dwelling units per acre, allowing for mixed use sites that propose 100% residential to be able to propose that for their sites. We also have to have at least a maximum density of 30 dwelling units per acre. And sites should fit into a certain size in order for it to be considered to meet our lower income units. They want to be large enough, but not too large. So between half an acre to 10 acres is a size that under statutory requirements should be used as lower to meet our lower income units. It's a much more difficult once they get outside of those parameters, it can make it difficult to redevelop sites that are too small or too large. And so this range really is identified by the state as being ideal for lower income opportunities. Sites also have to accommodate for at least 16 units, and any sites that have at least a 20% lower income dedication has a by right requirement. And so there's no discretionary review. We can apply objective design standards, but some of those subjective requirements were very limited to not approving projects based on subjective design standards. And so the work that we've done up until this point is to try to identify potential rezone sites. And that's identified in this row here as potential rezones. And so that 1388 shortage from the RENA, we're going to be adding an additional 3524 as rezone sites to be able to make meet our RENA, and then to have that minimum 20% buffer that we're aiming for. And so we've been talking about housing opportunity sites over the last couple of meetings, study sessions with the Housing Advisory Committee and our ad hoc committee. 26 sites were identified at the last joint meeting. And you can see on these aerial photos where those 6-cycle rezone sites are proposed. We've provided colors to show sites that we're proposing to rezone in the darker yellow. And then we also have sites that we expect that will be redeveloped beyond the 6-cycle. And so you'll see that almost all of the sites that are identified really are primarily in the core of the city. There are older sites that are from the 4th and 5th cycle that we're carrying forward into the 6th cycle, but really the primary additions to the 6th cycle are within the core of the city. And so at our last joint meeting, we presented 26 housing opportunity sites that we're proposing as rezones. There are tables in attachment A that go into more detail about each of those sites, what we anticipate as the net development area, and how many units we expect as a realistic capacity for each of those sites. So where we left off at our last meeting with our housing, our ad hoc committee, is really trying to narrow down, of those 26 sites, are there still sites that seem to be in question or questionable? And we have some discussion questions tonight to guide you in your discussion. The first one is just continuing to refine the housing opportunity sites list. Are there comments or feedback that we can take with us to prepare the draft housing element? And then we'd like to focus on those 3 housing opportunity sites that had been identified at the ad hoc meeting, and try to discuss whether or not those sites should be considered to be removed from the 6th cycle. And if we do that, there are some implications for those. It's identified on packet page 9 in the table of how many units would be pulled off. Packet page 8 and 9, how many units that could potentially be pulled off if we were to take those sites out. So that really just wraps up my presentation. We will have another opportunity at a joint session with the Planning Commission and City Council next week, so that as a group we can continue the discussion of sites inventory, but we're hoping to have a final recommendation to move forward with preparation of the draft housing element based on the feedback that we get and finalize on the 22nd. So with that, I can take some questions now, or we can certainly take those after public comment.
Through the chair, if I might, Cindy, can you go back to the slide that shows the sites to be included from the various cycles? I think there's an error that we amended the sites beyond the 2031 cycle, and the staff report is correct.
Oh, that's right. Let me.
You just want to pull up the staff report, maybe Cindy?
Yeah. Yeah, let me do that instead.
If I do 2 things on my computer, it will shut me down. Thank you. Sorry about that, Cindy. I just wanted to make that correction very quick.
Yeah, that's a good catch.
So while she's looking for that, could I ask a quick question? So I'm looking at the packet. I just want to make sure that this is the very big page and color that's stapled to the back of the packet. Is that correct? It doesn't. I don't see a packet page. That's why.
It should be packet page 40.
Okay.
Would be the last 2 pages of your staff report.
Okay. I see a 37 and then 2 more color pictures. Okay.
Thank you, Cindy.
All right, very good. So in my packet, it's stapled, the last stapled page. And then we get the 2 double-sized sheets.
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct. So this represents the housing opportunity sites zoomed in.
Okay. And then you said the corrections, or is this?
It was just an update from the ad hoc meeting. So
Okay.
we had updated some of the colors and to on this sheet, and so it's correct in your staff report. Just the presentation had the older graphic.
Okay. All right, very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Commissioner Edwards, I see your hand up.
Thank you. So I have a quick question. I'm not sure if this is appropriately addressed to Alicia or to Cindy. My question is whether identifying these sites as housing opportunity sites commits the city to completing rezoning and or commits the city to approving residential projects on these sites.
Perhaps I can start, and Alicia might be able to back me up. So the rezoning that we're going to do is, if it currently doesn't have a residential zone on it, Club Sport would be a really good example. And so it currently has a commercial recreation zone, and we would be rezoning that to allow for residential on that site. If it were to provide at least a 20% affordable lower income housing on that site, we do have to commit to being able to allow that type of residential development by right, because it has at least the 20%. So in those situations, the rezone does indicate to property owners and developers that the city has refined where housing should go and expectations of where housing is appropriate through this housing opportunity sites inventory, and that based on the parameters of SB 330 or filing an application under SB 35 or all of the other slew of housing laws that we are essentially saying that housing is an allowed use on those sites.
Okay, so, but there would still be a process, unless there's been a general plan amendment, there would be a process that each project needs to go through for example, a specific plan amendment to change the zoning on that particular site in conjunction with its particular application.
There would be, if there's a requirement for a specific plan change or some other legislative act, that would still require a discretionary review.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Wallace.
I had a couple of questions. First of all, let's assume for purposes of my question that a site already has a zoning that allows for residential. What does calling it a housing opportunity site really mean in that circumstance?
So by identifying it as a housing opportunity site in our housing element, the distinction from it currently having already a residential zone or allowing residential is that it's a signal essentially to HCD that we expect this housing opportunity site that we've designated to meet our RENA, the 5,111 housing units. The expectation is that the list of sites on that inventory is going to adequately address the housing need for RENA purposes.
Okay, so let's assume Bob owns a site that is zoned that allows residential. Is walking into our permit center with a page from our housing element says this is a housing opportunity site change the way his application to build would be treated?
If Bob's housing site, or if Bob's site was identified as a housing opportunity site, we would process the application no different than how we process any residential development application. The exception always is if it's 100% affordable, if it's more than 20% lower income. There are different rules in place for density bonuses and other, factors like that. But we review residential applications the same, regardless of whether they're a housing opportunity site or just a site that allows for residential use.
Okay, next question. In the charts, I guess most people got them as hard copy charts. I got them as Excel spreadsheets because it's easier for me to read and add up numbers that way. For the housing opportunity sites that what I consider new to the sixth cycle, you have proposed zoning for those sites. Are we locked into that zoning if we submit the application to HCD?
The rezoning doesn't occur, or the change to the zoning doesn't occur until we submit our public review draft for HCD to review. And so the rezone that's identified in the column is our recommendations of what the expected rezone is going to be for that site. But for purposes of site inventory, it's really to make sure that the 26 sites or the additional, 11 sites that we're carrying over, those sites meet the 5,111 units and has a realistic capacity based on that, and has a minimum density of at least the 20 dwelling units per acre if we're using it as lower income. We still have an opportunity to refine the code that is used. It may be a mixed use designation and have a more descriptive, title to it. It may be refined between RMH and RM. So it will have to coincide with our zoning ordinance and those codes. But once we define the realistic capacity, we've already identified generally what that rezone is going to be, but it may take one additional step for us to refine it so that it either meets the existing categories that we have, or we're creating a new category to really define that as a housing opportunity site.
So for example, if our submission to HCD as shown on the charts that you gave us indicates that the housing opportunity site 25 is mixed use, and we decide later on that it really should be high density multifamily, there's nothing to preclude us from doing that?
Nothing precludes us from doing that as long as the density range still has the minimum 20 and at least the maximum 30. I will say there are some caveats to mixed use versus residential. There are some requirements that require cities, if we are using mixed use sites as towards our lower income, if somebody wanted to do 100% affordable or 100% residential, that they still have some options to do that. So there's going to be different land use designations and zoning designations as we move forward in the general plan update. And those are really going to be refined to make sure that they also match our housing opportunity sites and the densities that we've assigned to those.
Okay, I wanted to follow up on your last comment. On packet page 8, at the bottom of the page, there's the last paragraph starts off, if a city is proposing to accommodate greater than 50% of lower income housing units on mixed use sites, close quote. And I wasn't quite clear what you meant by the city accommodating lower income units on mixed use sites. Is that done on a site by site basis, or is it done on an overall city basis? In other words, if when we submit HCD our proposal, and 45% of the lower income units are attributable to mixed use housing sites, does that allocation trigger the requirement that if someone walks in with a proposal to put 100% housing on a mixed-use site, that person has a right to do that?
If only 45% of our sites are mixed use and accommodate the lower income, it doesn't meet that threshold of 50%.
Okay, so it's only if more than 50% of our lower income units on a citywide basis stem from mixed-use sites that the language on the bottom of packet page 8 kicks in.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Last question. Would it be fair to say that this housing element will require a number of modifications to both our general plan and one or more specific plans?
Yes.
Okay. And I know I talked to you and Debbie and Lauren about this earlier, but can you give us sort of the outside date when we need to have all this submitted to HCD?
Yeah, so our goal, in order to get to the statutory requirements for certification of our housing element, and because of our Measure G requirements for 3 public hearings before the Planning Commission and City Council, it puts us in a pretty tight time frame to get the housing element adopted. Our goal is to do the rezone and the housing element adoption concurrently. By doing that, that gives more flexibility to the city if we were to rezone ahead of the statutory deadline. Our goal is by November of this year to have our 3 public hearings before the Planning Commission and City Council complete, and then ready for adoption so that HCD can certify by January 2023.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Marks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also had that paragraph on my list of questions, and I'll ask the question this way, Cindy. Given what you said in that paragraph, can you, which is a bit esoteric, can you identify those shopping centers in the city that would be affected?
Could you tell me again, just which paragraph again?
The same one that Eric was talking about, page 8, last paragraph. Any center that has mixed use zoning. What I'm trying to get in my head is, this is what we have to live up to. Where in San Ramon is this a possibility of occurring?
So if we look at the tables currently, Country Club Village, for example, one shopping center, that's expected to meet our moderate income units. And so that particular site is not proposing to accommodate our lower income. So Country Club Village would not be a site that would be lower. Marketplace would be another one that's proposing 96 moderate income units. That doesn't, that's not being used as a site as to meet our lower income. Magnolia Square is a site at 79 lower income units. If they were to propose 100% residential, that would be one of the sites that could potentially trigger that. And I think that was, at least for the shopping centers that we've identified, those are the ones that have the lower versus the moderate.
So none of the other shopping centers, Diablo Vista, Gateway, would potentially be affected by what you've stated in that last paragraph.
Right.
Okay.
Diablo, forgot the proper name. Diablo.
Yeah, I
think it's
shopped
just
there for
Diablo
30 years
Plaza.
and I can't remember.
Diablo Plaza and Gateway Shopping Centers, those actually do not have a residential land use component associated with those. Those were changed a number of years back. And so they actually wouldn't be permitted, at least the way that the current land use designations are for those sites.
What about the shops at Bishop Ranch?
That also has a straight commercial zoning, and so the mixed use does not apply to that site.
Thank you. For me, that makes it a little bit easier to put it together. And while I do appreciate that you came up with the larger scale tables, I sometimes miss things given the font size, and I just want to make sure I know what I'm doing here. So thank you.
Commissioner Wallace, your hand popped up next.
I wanted to make sure I understood the bottom paragraph on page 8, which Commissioner Marks just went over. With respect to the 50% or more lower income units, is that looked at on a site by site basis? In other words, we have site X. Let's just say site X is zoned mixed use, but it's not a shopping center. So if we allocate more than 50% of the units on that specific site to the lower income category, does that trigger the strictures of the paragraph at the bottom of packet page 8? Which is basically a developer can walk in and say, you know what, I know this is zoned mixed use, but I really don't like commercial, so I'm going to do 100% residential.
It's a collective total, as I said, 50% of all mixed use sites. I'll confirm that with our consultant in time for our meeting on the 22nd, but that's my understanding, is that it's a total of all of the mixed use sites.
That's how I read the bottom of packet page 8, but I would appreciate if someone could clarify that for me in simple English.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Albert.
I'm still on those same 2 paragraphs at the bottom of page 8. Sorry. The second to the last paragraph, it discusses that, you know, for instance, at the marketplace, the Residence Inn, Valero, and Library are being pulled out as mixed use. What does that mean? Does that mean we're going to rezone those particular parcels, or what exactly is meant by that?
So I'll say that for purposes of site inventory and housing opportunity sites, it's not being recommended as a future housing opportunity sites for those parcels that are listed. There will be a second step, and we're asking for opinions and discussions as we move into policy. As far as policy, if these sites are not housing opportunity sites, we're not relying on them to meet our RHNA. But as a city, for purposes of preserving retail, as we've talked about quite a bit, do we want to modify the land use designation on those? They currently have a mixed use designation, which, as we know, under SB 330, allows a developer to file an application for some component of residential and commercial on their property. If we want to take any future opportunity for redevelopment of those sites with residential, then we would have to modify the zoning destination from what's currently mixed use to something that would not allow for residential. But that's going to be really a policy discussion that we take on with after we've settled on the sites inventory list, and we can talk about how do we preserve retail. So right now we're trying to identify housing opportunity sites to meet RHNA, and then the effect of that is, now that we've identified which sites are housing opportunities, do we want to then look at how do we preserve retail?
Okay, I think I follow. And then I guess probably a similar answer, 8 acres at Country Club Village, including Walmart and smaller inline tenants. How do we interpret that? That is that the same policy answer, or, and because the whole shopping center isn't shown as a 6-cycle rezone, are we?
Right. So in the fifth cycle, right now, Country Club Village, the entirety of Country Club Village is a housing opportunity site. Based on our conversations about trying to preserve as much retail as possible, but still having adequate housing opportunity sites. What staff is proposing is that in order to count it as housing opportunity site, only using a portion of the shopping center as kind of the first step of preserving the retail on that within that shopping center. So a large portion of that site to be not designated as a housing opportunity site. Then that gives us the flexibility if we were to rezone that property to then, because we're not counting it as a housing opportunity site, be able to redesignate it as something other than mixed use.
Okay, I kind of think I'm following that. Could the same rationale be applied to the marketplace then, the entirety of the shopping center, the part that's not already slated to become something else possibly? Yeah.
So there are still properties surrounding marketplace, and when we refer to marketplace, there's a lot of different properties that may not necessarily be part of the shopping center, but are located on marketplace, the street. And so some of them sometimes get referred to as the shopping center, but they're all somewhat distinctly have different ownerships. The ones that are outside of the shopping center, we've have a list of those on your inventory list that will continue to carry on as fifth cycle carryover sites. But then we're also recommending residents in the library,
Valero, I think.
the Valero, thank you, and taking those off as to reduce the acreage of that housing opportunity site.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful, I think. Thank you. Another question, looking at the complete list of 4 or 5 cycle housing opportunity sites, some of them no longer are highlighted as either carryover or pipeline projects. Is it correct they're still valid places for housing? And for instance, let's take the San Ramon Village specific plan area where we have a housing overlay. Only 3 or so of the 13 are identified as carryover, or 4, I think, 4 are listed on our opportunity sites as being carryover. The remaining 8 or 9, I know one of them is Golden Gate, which has already been turned into housing or is a pipeline project, but the rest of the area, it still remains housing. We're not contemplating taking housing away from any of those sites, or are we? Yeah.
So this is one of those step 1, step 2 type of discussions. Again, for housing opportunity site purposes, we've identified only just a very limited number of housing opportunity sites in that residential overlay to count towards our RENA. We will have to, from policy standpoint, after we've narrowed down these housing opportunity sites, to determine as a whole, because we already meet our RENA, do we want to take off the residential overlay now that we have the opportunity to do it concurrently with this effort of housing element? So we're not, at least at this stage, recommending taking off the residential overlay. We're only defining the list of housing opportunity sites. By not identifying it as a housing opportunity site, it then gives the city the flexibility to decide in step 2, as we're doing our land use updates, whether or not we want to keep the overlay on there.
Very good. Thank you. That helps. And then I think this is my last question. Some of the sites that are now either 4 or 5 opportunity sites or 6 cycle rezones, is it safe to say that we have a highly realistic and high probability that they will be turned over in the 8-year cycle, and that's by definition why they're opportunity sites for this cycle? And we're not just, or are we? Is that a fair assumption?
That is, and a lot of things have informed those decisions. We've talked previously about stakeholder interviews and development trends. Certain areas that have started to redevelop have a higher possibility of adjacent parcels being redeveloped now because of some of that infrastructure that's been put in place to assist with neighboring properties. And so there's a lot of different factors that have gone into refining this list. And because state law has now really made housing element and site inventory accountability a priority, whereas before cities would just provide a list of everything and hope that some of that sticks, we're really, from a state standpoint, we're really having to make sure that these sites are viable sites.
And then I guess a follow-up, do we have the latitude if a site is highly likely to develop and the owner would like to develop, but we don't, in our collective wisdom, don't feel it's a good idea? Under state law, are we allowed to do that, or does the property owner have recourse to appeal whether they are a housing opportunity site or are going to be rezoned?
I think that's really what this public review process is going to be as we release the public review draft and the policies that go with those. Those are subject to public review and comments. And then HCD will evaluate what those comments have been through the review process and evaluate our proposed element based on all of the comments that have been received. And so there is a potential, if we propose these lists of housing opportunity sites and there's a lot of concern from the public or property owner, that's all part of the record that goes to HCD.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Cindy, for the answers. That's really helpful.
Commissioner Wallace?
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on a question that Commissioner Alpert posed, and that is this. If we have zoned portions of our city to allow residential, specifically the housing overlay in the San Ramon Village Plan area, are we permitted under SB 330 to downzone that to strictly commercial?
We're obligated to do concurrent rezoning if we decide to shift one site from what's currently allows for residential to something that does not allow for residential. If we can concurrently do those rezones at the same time, which is essentially why we're trying to get all of the rezones to line up at the same time as our sites inventory, then we have the ability to make those changes to those documents to reflect that we no longer, as a city, want to see residential on those sites. The concurrent requirement in part speaks to our RENA obligation. And so because we do have adequate sites that we've identified to meet our RENA, and we're doing it concurrently, there is no net loss issue.
Well, I guess in more layman's terms, if we meet our RENA numbers, we can rezone portions of the city which are zoned for residential but not part of our housing inventory. We can change the zoning to retail, commercial, mixed use, or parks.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
All right, seeing no additional hands at this point, we are going to, or no other questions at this point, we are going to open up for public comment. So I'd like to remind members of the public that public comment at special meetings is limited to the item described in the notice, and therefore only public comment related to the agenda item will be heard this evening. If you wish to speak under public comment, you may click the raise your hand button on your computer or *9 on your telephone to request to speak when public comment is taken. You will be unmuted and allotted 3 minutes to speak, after which time you will then be remuted. And so Jennifer, do we have any, I think we have you're going to tell me what we have.
Yes, thank you. So we received one written public comment from Susie Ferris Indercombe, and this comment was provided to the planning commissioners prior to tonight's special meeting. And that was the last, that was the only public comment, written comment we received. So we can move on to our audience at this time. I see one hand raised. And Joyce Carr, I will go ahead and allow you to speak whenever you are ready.
Good evening. I'm Joyce Carr, a San Ramon resident, and I'm a member of CAMPAD. Housing is a policy priority for the state of California. However, removing a grocery store like Nob Hill is wrong for our city. The major grocery stores in San Ramon now are Walmart, and I just heard comments about Walmart, Lucky's, and Safeway. Sprouts, Whole Foods, Target, and Trader Joe's are not considered full-service grocery stores. The marketplace needs a full-service grocery store consistent with the zoning that is in place. Please keep the current zoning that includes a grocery store to help the growing imbalance of retail services to the housing growth. And with all the new homes going into Bishop Ranch, this kind of retail is absolutely needed at this location. Lastly, we need a specific plan for the marketplace, which also includes the sports basement, Buffalo Wild Wings, Starbucks sites, in keeping with the general plan requirements. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Joyce.
you, Joyce. Okay, and we have another speaker, Susan Ferris Indercombe. You'll have 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you. You already received my written comments, so I'm not going to touch base on that. But I did want to ask a couple more follow-up questions on the last paragraph on packet page 8. And Cindy, what I'm looking for in terms of clarification, in the table on number 2 there, it's listing 3 of the 9 parcels associated with Marketplace. And those are not the central portion of the Marketplace. So is there the possibility that that last paragraph would kick in with the larger known areas of Marketplace where Nob Hill and Starbucks and CVS are?
Thank you. Was that the end of your comment?
Yes, that's
Okay.
the question.
No problem. Thank you so much. Okay, and at this time, it looks like that completes our public comment from the audience.
So we will close public comment, and I'm going to ask a favor. Cindy, do you feel comfortable in being able to answer the question? I know we're not supposed to, but are you allowed to? Okay, if the answer is no, then I will accept that, but.
If you prefer me to answer, I certainly can, in terms of at least what the map shows us. So if I could maybe pull back up that aerial drawing that we had earlier. The blue indicates 4th and 5th cycle sites. As I've indicated on the staff report, we've taken out residents in the library and the Valero station as future housing opportunity sites, but we are carrying the 4th and 5th cycle sites in this blue color forward into our 6th cycle housing element. We also identify in green pipeline projects that are in this lower half of the of the center, south of Marketplace. This is Montgomery. In any case, the green is bound by El Costa and this loop road. That is considered a pipeline project site. That continues to carry the mixed use zoning designation, and so still has the ability to have residential development and commercial. So it does continue to carry forward as a pipeline project site, and then fourth and fifth cycle site.
All right, thank you so much. I believe that will be helpful. All right, so we have closed public comment. And so at this point, commissioners, we have our discussion of the proposed list and the questions that staff have provided us. Although I think, well, no, I don't think. I'll just read the questions. Sorry. So, questions for consideration. Are there any further refinements we should consider for inclusion or exclusion? And is the density proposed appropriate for whichever site? And then should the three housing opportunity sites, such as Eric's Deli, Staples, and the parking lot next to Staples, remain or be removed? So those are the questions that staff would like us to address. And so do we have some? Yes, Commissioner Marks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I've stated from the outset, when the ad hoc committee first met and at our joint meeting with the Housing Advisory Committee, my two concerns with the outcomes of the housing element and ultimately the land use element updates are, number one, keeping the higher density housing away from existing residential neighborhoods. And to that end, with just a couple of exceptions, I think the staff and the consultants have done a very good job. And I don't have a lot of comment about the items that are on the housing opportunity site list. The second concern I have, however, is, again, it's one thing to meet the state's obligations or the state imposed obligations regarding housing, but you got to take a look at what you're doing to the city along the way. And I am still concerned about how are we going to address changes proposed in our neighborhood shopping centers going from retail to housing, and what percentage of housing. One of the things I would like to see the staff do in the future, it's probably too late for the March ad hoc committee meeting, is provide a more robust discussion about that we can analyze, that has a lot of detail by shopping center. What amount of retail could we potentially lose to housing on a shopping center by shopping center basis if we do nothing to try to manage this? And what could we do, if anything, to try and manage this to what might be more acceptable levels than if we did nothing? I have a lot of faith that the staff can provide more information about what the law is going to require us to do, what each shopping center may end up looking like at build out. As an example, I would really appreciate having a table that lays out the name of the shopping center in one column, the total acreage in another column, the gross ground floor square footage in a third column, and the maximum percent of acreage or ground floor square feet that could be converted to housing if we did nothing, if we did not address this. And if there are options for addressing this, I've proposed that we need policies. Maybe that's the wrong approach. I'm not wedded to the notion of there have to be policies, but I don't want to find that we are in a position where we not only have to allow a large percentage of a shopping center to become dominated by housing, but we could have done something about it and we didn't. If we are precluded by state law from doing anything, then that's the way it is. But I don't know that yet. I would greatly appreciate a very robust written discussion about how retailing is either going to change, might change, could be prevented for the ad hoc committee as soon as possible. And again, I recognize the 22nd is probably too soon, but, and certainly for the full commission. And that leads me to where I have a couple of disagreements with the housing opportunity sites list as proposed by the staff. And again, this is no surprise to the ad hoc committee. I've been saying this for several months now. I do not think there is a good case to be made, given the overall needs of the city, housing and other uses, to eliminate the Eric's Deli portion of that retail center. I can agree that the movie theater site could become a housing opportunity site. It's not my favorite idea, but I know we have some obligations to meet, and this is a site that could host housing. And I think that the world of movie theaters is shrinking as people all over begin to stream their entertainment. But the Eric's Deli portion is a neighborhood serving use. It provides local jobs in an office building as well as on site. And I think that there are other opportunities to get to the arena numbers that we need. To that end, I have proposed the Center Point building, which is discussed in the staff report. There is a note, however, in the staff report that says we really don't need the Center Point building because we've already achieved what we need. But I don't feel that we will have achieved what we should for the overall benefit of the city long-term by getting rid of the Eric's Deli portion of the overall retail area. I feel the same way about the Staples retail building and parking lot, but I have to say that if it were demonstrated to me that you can't get rid of both on the list, you have to convert one to a housing opportunity site, I would opt to save the Eric's Deli portion of the site. And to that end, one of the requests I've made during ad hoc committee meetings that I'm hopeful we will receive information on is I would like to see a number of the higher density properties that are those that are proposed for higher density evaluated at even higher densities. In the North Camino Ramon specific plan area for the Bishop Ranch properties, as an example, they're at 30 dwelling units per acre. Why not look at 35 or 40? If that helps us save some of the retail sites in the city, I'm not thrilled about going to higher density everywhere, but I have to say that again, going back to my sense of what the city is and needs in the long term, we are already committed to about a population growth of 25,000 people over the years to come. Given what we have done in terms of 4,500 dwelling units in the Bishop Ranch in the City Walk project, the 404 units that Summerhill is already under construction with, what we have approved, 750 units in the San Ramon Village specific plan area, plus we have 5,000 units that we have to meet, or some number that is in the thousands, to have a shrinking retail base while you have a growing population base just doesn't make sense to me if there are other options. I don't agree with what the state is doing, but I have to say that to the extent that we can do something, we need to stand up for the overall mix of services that residents need. I really believe that the Center Point building might offer an opportunity. I also believe that if that is an inappropriate site in the view of the Planning Commission, that going to higher densities where we can in the North Camino Ramon Pacific Plan area, which is really not in a residential area, and certainly in the Bishop Ranch area, really needs to be discussed. We need a worksheet that shows us for some of those properties, in fact, for all of those properties that are at 30 units, what would happen if we go to 35 in terms of preserving retail? What would happen if we went to 40 in terms of preserving retail? For me, that is really the most important local issue that a general plan update should accomplish. And you know, I know that planning commissioners know this, but for the record, we all know that a general plan is required to conform to state requirements, but it is also expected that it will address local issues consistent with state law. And I just feel like we have the consultants, we have the staff that can provide a deeper review of preserving retail, and we would be remiss as a commission if we did not require it and ask the staff tonight to do that. Again, I don't mean to diss on the consultants or the staff. They have a tough job, and I think in an unreasonable period of time as imposed by the state. But this is where we are. And for me to feel comfortable recommending approval of the housing element to the staff when we don't know what we could have done relative to preserving retail on a site-by-site basis would be very difficult. So I'm asking tonight that the Planning Commission, if you agree, please so state so that it's clear to the staff that we need to have a robust discussion about preserving retail. And I thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Barr.
Good evening. Just wanted to clarify one of the comments that Cindy made that speaks to this point. We talked about focusing on rezoning of shopping centers to essentially to split shopping centers between mixed use and non-mixed use. And so this is one way in which we preserve a core portion of a shopping center as a commercial use. The other portion can remain as a mixed use, which may go all residential, it may go partially residential, but at least in that case, we are preserving this base that we're trying to protect through this policy. And it does require some additional analysis, policy analysis and analysis at a site level. But that's just getting, it's a little too detailed for the discussion of the housing opportunity sites at this point. But again, that was the strategy that Cindy was outlining when she used the example of down at the Walmart Center.
Thank you. Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Respectfully, Lauren, I do think it is appropriate for this. If you're going to include retail on the housing opportunity sites list in the housing element, and there's already the potential for some amount of conversion. You know, you mentioned keeping the core retail base. I don't know what the core is defined as. I really believe that to include, let's say, the Eric's Deli site on the housing opportunity site and wait until the land use element, then you got to go back and amend the housing element if you want to take it off.
I don't believe that's the case, because you're in a situation where you're making some assumptions about a partial density on a site. The zoning will be the tool by which you lock in those issues. If you talk about Eric's Deli site, there's huge portions of parking lot that could remain as mixed use and be coupled with the theater site, and you could lock in the corner as a commercial use. And so, these are things that will need to be worked out at a design level, but ultimately you can accomplish both things by creating potential housing sites as well as locking down commercial use. And the thing is, and we've talked about this in the past, rezoning is going to be required to deal with these issues. It's not enough to say we want a policy of a percentage of commercial in a mixed use area, because the mixed use designation as a whole opens the door to all of it. So I think we have to take the next step and actually go back and revise the zoning like we did with Gateway and some of the other shopping centers.
Then that begs the question, or the point that I made, which is we need a more robust discussion of what we can do at this level and what would occur at the zoning level, and how each shopping center would be affected if somebody came in with a request for housing. I feel like you may be right, and I am perfectly willing to concede that I could be wrong. But if you take a look at the reports that have been generated so far, there is almost no discussion about retail and preserving it.
Again, well, Cindy, go ahead.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of text in the staff reports. Sometimes it makes it difficult to follow along, and we can do a better job of calling out specifically the retail. I was attempting to do that on packet page 8 with the table for the shopping centers. Maybe if I can just really summarize what's happening with retail is that our strategy for 4th cycle and 5th cycle housing element had been to meet our RHNA using mixed use designations on shopping centers to be able to accommodate our RHNA. Over the last couple of years, our policy direction has really shifted to make sure that we're looking more closely at how do we preserve retail while still meeting our RHNA. That effort that we did a couple of years ago, taking out Diablo Plaza, taking out Gateway Shopping Center, the shops at Bishop Ranch, that was our first push towards making sure we still had our RHNA obligations met, but taking out the mixed use zoning to no longer allow for residential uses on those sites. And so those sites could redevelop or reimagine themselves, but it could only be for commercial uses. What we're trying to do with the housing opportunity sites now is the rest of the shopping centers that are still housing opportunity sites that we did not change in 2017 through 2019. We still have 3 shopping centers that have the housing opportunity sites on those. And they're identified here. Well, 2 of them, Country Club and Marketplace, are 2 that still have a housing opportunity site, had one in 5th cycle, had one in 4th cycle, and portions of it are being carried over in 6th cycle. So Country Club is 2.5 acres of the overall total 10.7 acre property. That's what we're identifying as strictly that portion of the center being a future 6th cycle housing opportunity site. What we decide to do then with the remainder 8 acres of Country Club Village is what we'll have to decide if we rezone it from mixed use as a measure to preserve the retail. What is the appropriate zoning designation for that? Is it going to be retail shopping? Will it be mixed use commercial that does not allow for residential? But as long as we're not designating it a housing opportunity site, we're not then committed to keeping the residential land use on that shopping center. And so that's perhaps it doesn't read that way, but that's essentially these 3 shopping centers that have retail uses. These are the ones that are proposed, at least right now in the 6th cycle, to have residential units to accommodate our arena. If we decide to take out, for example, Magnolia Square, Country Club, and Marketplace, we're looking at 217 units, then we would have to make sure that we still, by removing those, can be accommodated elsewhere in our housing opportunity sites. So that's some of the feedback that we're asking for tonight. We've already pared down a portion of the housing opportunity sites that currently exists as 5th cycle as a measure to reduce the retail loss. And then if we decide to take it out of as a housing opportunity site, what should that land use then be? That's really sort of what this is trying to show.
I do understand that, and I appreciate what you're doing. Hence my request for a worksheet that shows if we up the density elsewhere, given the need to concurrently rezone, we might preserve retail here. I can't seem to get that through in a way that's clear to people, but it just seems to me that if we don't have any ability to do that, then we are where we are. But for instance, if we could gain 200 units more over the number of buildings in the Bishop Ranch, then we don't have to have these shopping centers on the block. Am I correct about that?
So policy is certainly one way to get additional units on housing opportunity sites. And what we've currently identified as ranges of density are ranges that, based on past practice and development in the city, that we can tell the state that we've been able to achieve these densities. We can up the densities, and that's one of the measures to increase the lower density range, to increase those up. Are you suggesting that we go, instead of 20 to 60 that's proposed in the ranch, to have a lower density, have a higher minimum density range in those areas?
Yes, I'd like to understand if we added more density elsewhere in the city, in the San Ramon specific plan area or in the Bishop Ranch area, and we have to make up a deficit of, I don't know, I think you said 211 or whatever it was units. Yes, what are the options for doing that? How would we proceed to do that? How would we take something off of the 4th or 5th cycle list and increase the proposed density on the 6th cycle properties? It seems to me that it's really a matter that we're obligated to provide those units, but where is the question? And I see the central portion of the city as being the first place you look to build the housing, rather than in the outlying areas where the shopping centers are. And all I'm asking for is a detailed discussion of what that would look like, what are the densities that could be applied, how we might go about that. Right now, I don't feel like I've been given any options to consider. I'm simply being told this is how it is. And I know that you and the staff are smart enough to do this, to come up with a worksheet and a discussion that the commission can then evaluate and either say, you're right, staff, what you have on page 8 is what we need to do, or to give us another option.
Okay, Commissioner Edwards, thank you for waiting.
Thank you. I do want to just take a minute and commend staff. This project is a heavy lift, and I think you've actually done a very good job of communicating with the commission and pulling together some of the documentation. I'm mindful here that we're at 6:15, so I'm going to try to go through my comments quickly. I've got a couple of comments about some of the questions that were posed to staff earlier. I've got some comments on the specific sites that we've been asked to talk about. And then some broader policy related comments that hopefully are consistent with the theme of what we're trying to do tonight in terms of providing staff with some guidance. The first issue relates to this paragraph that's on packet page number 8. If I understand correctly, the concerns are that we're going to wind up designating more than 50% of our RENA allocation onto mixed use sites. And if we do that, we're going to lose our ability to control those sites and put retail uses on those sites, meaning developers have the opportunity to come along to a mixed use site that the city would like to have as retail and make it 100% residential. To my mind, the fix there is for us to designate more sites. The more sites we designate, I think the more flexibility we retain. And I think that that is important for us as a city. So that's the first comment I wanted to make. The graphics that we were provided for each of the parcels that we're being asked to consider were, to me, extremely helpful. The thing that they really highlight is how much of our land on these various retail sites is actually being used for retail and how much of it is actually being used for surface parking lot. We're going to have more land available for retail use, residential use, and recreational use, or whatever other use we want to make of the land, if we start handling our parking differently. I think we saw that a little bit with City Center when the development of the structured parking. Even the City Center site has an awful lot of surface parking lot around it. We're going to have more spots, more land for the stuff we want if we can start handling and managing our surface parking lots differently. The specific sites that we're being asked to talk about, I'm not in favor of removing any of them as housing opportunity sites. The Eric Stelly parcel, again, yes, it's got a successful retail center there. I go to the optometrist there. I used to go to the dentist there, but a lot of that site is surface parking lot. So let's use that land a little bit more responsibly. The same thing with the Staples parking lot and the Staples parking lot. The 18 Crow Canyon Court small office buildings, I think we should be adding those to our housing opportunity site list. As an addition, I don't think we should be substituting one for the other. I do think that we should be including them all. Increasing the density on some of these sites, I think, is absolutely essential. The more units we put in this location, right, the more units we put here, the fewer units we need to put there. It's the trade-offs. And I think that we do have more flexibility than we feel we may. Something else I wanted to just mention, particularly in view of some of the projects and the land areas that we're going to be talking about at tonight's regular meeting and that we talked about at our last meeting, is what can we do as a city to be encouraging and supporting retail? And I think we need to be very intentional about adjacencies. Do the land uses around the retail support the retail and activate the area? I think we can look around the city, and I think we can look at a lot of our surrounding cities. Isolated strip malls, the 4 stores with a bunch of surface parking out in front, they are failing. They're failing right and left. We're hearing property owners come and complain about that. I can't keep a retail tenant. I can't attract tenants in this space because I've got a bunch of empty storefronts. I do think we need to be thinking about that. Are we supporting, encouraging uses in our retail centers that are going to drive traffic to the retail stores? And if we're not, then I think we need to be reconsidering the use of that land. Almost done. I've said it before, I don't think that retail and residential uses are mutually exclusive. I'm a big proponent of mixed use projects. I do think that surface parking lots are incompatible with residential and retail. And I think that we need to be honest about when we're talking about removing some of these shopping centers from our list of housing opportunity sites. Are we saving retail, or do we have a strong retail presence on this particular piece of land? Or do we have one retail store that we like and we're really preserving a surface parking lot? I think we need to be thinking about that. To staff's question about density, and I am particularly proud of this every time we have a meeting where we're doing a concept review of a project. We need to continue to communicate to the development community that areas that are zoned for higher residential density need to be developed at a higher density. I think in the last 6 months, we've communicated that, I don't know, I think at least 6 times to different developers who are coming in with minimum density projects. So I think that's something that we as a commission can and should continue to do. And then the last comment is just to staff. If you're going to pull together a spreadsheet along the lines of what Commissioner Marks has suggested, I would appreciate there being a column that doesn't just tell us about the surface area of that particular parcel, but I'd also love to have an estimate of how much of that particular site has actually been improved with a residential building. I think it's important for us to be able to identify if we're trying to protect a site that's really 85% parking lot. So I think that's the majority of my comments. I did want to just comment that I think if I understood the report correctly, we've removed Crow Canyon Commons from the housing opportunity site list. In view of the comments that we heard at our last meeting about the property owner's concerns about the ongoing retail use at that site, I'm not sure we should be doing that. So I think that's something that we may want to consider, particularly given the size of that site. And that's all.
I think the Crow Canyon Commons still shows on your previous, I wrote it in, the 4th cycle map.
Just to clarify on specifically Crow Canyon Commons, it is not identified as a 6th cycle housing opportunity site. It's in the North Camino Ramon specific plan. That is one of the parcels that has a residential, a land use that allows for residential on that site. And so in discussions with our stakeholders, there was, at least for the short term, not an expectation that there would be redevelopment on that site by 2031 for residential. But we have kept it on our graphic as a beyond 2031 housing opportunity site that we potentially revisit in the 7th cycle.
You are correct, and I'm not discerning my colors correctly, so I apologize.
Thank you.
Misstating that. Commissioner Alpert, do you have feedback on the 2 questions?
I do. And not to be redundant, I do appreciate Commissioner Marks' willingness to do a deeper dive into retail at the ad hoc meeting. I think that's the right place for them to do the heavy lifting. So I think that's a good idea. It may or may not change anything, but I think having the discussion and then, the full commission gets the benefit of the hard work that they do would, I think, make us all feel better about what we're doing with retail. Under the 6th cycle sites, there was a request for confirmation or changes. The only real confirmation I think for next time I had was the Church of the Valley site. I know it's only programmed for, I think, 40 units. with the expectation. I just like to better understand, what, if anything, we're doing with the creek setback to accommodate 40 units. And if there's nothing there, that's fine. It just wasn't super clear to me. Retail, I'm going to the 3 shopping centers. Have an opinion slightly different than Commissioner Edwards. The Eric's Deli site, I do feel, is something we should attempt to preserve. With housing right next to it, I think it's well suited. It's on a main boulevard, a main corridor, and I think it is a good retail opportunity site. The Magnolia Square, that was one of the ones, right, that we were supposed to comment on. I struggle with that one a little bit. The place that I think housing would work is the backside, the one right next to the gas station we just put in. The front side that's on Crow Canyon, we've been told it's the right side of the freeway, it's the gravity side, it's the going home side or the going to work side. It should be one of our more robust sites to continue to preserve. And to be honest, I'm a little bit surprised that the property owner indicated a somewhat willingness to do something there, given comments we've heard on some of the rationale. Others don't, because they've recently done a lot of tenant improvements, and they just built the big cosmetic store there. So I'm surprised they would even consider doing something with that center. So if we can, my opinion would be to preserve the Crow Canyon side of the shopping center and let the back side that is all surface parking, convert to housing, which might not be bad because it's going to be catty corner to the Danville housing project. So it's housing around housing. Staples, I have a hard time imagining that being a good housing opportunity site, to be honest with you, as busy as it is on Crow Canyon there. I think, like Commissioner Marks, I guess I'd put that as a lower, desire to protect versus the other two, but I'm really struggling to, appreciate that could be, visualize how that could become housing. And so those are the questions, and I'll keep my brief comments brief. So that's all I have.
So to wrap this up and hopefully get us all out of here so we can have a break. I'm okay with the Eric's Deli staying on the list. I agree with the comments about the Magnolia Square. I think the backside looks good. I think the marketplace, we're our hands are tied somewhat on the marketplace. Let's see, what was the third one? Sorry, shifting my pages to follow along here. And Staples, I don't have a problem with the Staples. I actually think that as we are trying to reimagine retail, that moving a stationery store and those kinds of things closer to the core center would be helpful as that does develop, because that is a need. I do think it's interesting, and the only comment that I have on the situation with the Eric's Deli is that it's interesting that all the shops and stores that are on the opposite side of San Ramon Valley Boulevard seem to be doing a very good business. There seems to be very little turnover in those stores and shops. And so I think one of the messages about retail and the viability of retail isn't so much about whether or not there's customers, but can the businesses stay in business if their rent allows their business model to persist? And that's a different question that I think the shopping center over where Katie's Corner is and some of those seem to be doing fine. And I suspect that perhaps those tenants have a slightly different rent structure than some of our other retail places that are having a tough time getting remaining in business. And so consequently, that also then, if there's housing on that one portion adjacent to the movie theater, there are a lot of supporting businesses that would surround it. So I have a little slightly different, but I also appreciate wanting to maintain our retail. And I think that that's one of those things, as we looked at the San Ramon Village, the project known as Rome, that was the corner that was designed to be a robust retail node. And so, I mean, we are cognizant of that and trying to keep that in the forefront. I like the idea of the increased density. And I think if you looked at downtown Walnut Creek, it could be done well. It can be done in a manner that the residents appreciate it. Those are my comments, and I see Commissioner Wallace has raised his hand. So you go. You're on.
Okay, I'm going to try and make this short because of the time. Staples and the parking lot next to it, I've gone back and forth on it, but if you've been out there, you notice that there's housing right across the driveway from Staples and right up the hill from the parking lot. So notwithstanding its proximity to Home Depot, that's probably okay for a housing site, and Staples and the other big office supply stores, I think, are losing out, unfortunately, to Amazon. So if the owner wants to develop it, I think that's okay. With respect to Eric's Deli, I've gone back and forth on that. The problem is that it's already zoned for mixed use, and according to the staff report, they're indicating that the owner has said things that lead staff to believe that there's a, quote, high possibility, close quote, of it converting to residential pursuant to its mixed use designation. I'm not sure if high possibility means 40% or it really means high probability, which is more like 60 or 70%. The thing about Eric's Deli is it's next to the theater, which I think there's 4 acres there that could be developed at one time. I would be willing, and I think it would make sense, to swap the output at Eric's for the Center Point office building for this reason. What we've done in the draft housing element is to take out office space, non-retail space, and convert it to housing. The Center Point office building is right next to Ryan Industrial Court, which we've designated as a housing opportunity site. It's also cheek to jowl to the office park that we've decided to keep as a sort of a suburban office park. I would be willing to give up the office space there because we're going to have a surfeit of office space probably in Bishop Ranch. That's something to look at, but we may not need to. And like Rick, I've mentioned this before. I think there's areas in the city that we've designated as housing opportunity sites where we're undersized in terms of the density. Specifically, the office buildings that are in Bishop Ranch, the Executive Parkway buildings, and the one that's across the corner for it. If you're going to tear down an office building like that, you're going to have to want to have some density in that area to make up for the cost. I think you look at BR1A, that's the future for Bishop Ranch housing. That's, I think, 45 dwelling units per acre. That's before some of us said, take out the interior and put some housing units in place of the stairwell. So I think there is opportunity there to make up for density and keep some of the smaller retail store areas. What I'm really concerned about is not any of those things. It's changing the density and the look of Crow Canyon between Crow Canyon Place and Camino Ramon. And I was told this morning that one of the reasons for that is there's now a single owner for the property from US Bank all the way down to the beauty store. And that's the person who's interested in developing it for housing. It is possible that you could develop housing in that area without sacrificing commercial development if you were willing to define mixed use to have a requirement, a specific requirement for non-retail uses. Many cities have a requirement of a certain percentage has to be either retail or housing. Sometimes it's 25% max on residential, sometimes 25% max on non-residential. But I think that's something we have to look at, but we have to be very careful because in this housing element, we have programmed a certain number of units for those spaces. And if you start cutting out portions like the shopping center at Country Club, you start cutting off pieces of it and say, this will be residential, but the rest will be retail or commercial. I mean, you've got a problem with how much density you really can put on that property. So it's not an easy thing to do. It's like a Bernoulli's principle. If you push it on a balloon, it comes out someplace else. or you break the balloon. We don't want to have that problem. So I think overall, I think staff has done a really good job of focusing growth in the center of the city where it should belong, not impinging on neighborhoods, and not sacrificing retail too much. I just think that it's possible it could be tweaked, but I think we're frankly a long way towards getting something that we can live with. Where the rubber is going to hit the road is on the second phase, when we start defining policies for the general plans and specific plans and providing specifics for what is considered mixed use. We've never done that before. We've talked about it ad nauseum, but I think it's time we sort of did that now. And I think right now with this housing element, we think we got to, fish or cut bait on that. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. All right. So staff, do you have what you need from us going into our joint meeting?
Considering that we're also going to be getting some feedback from City Council as well on the sites inventory, our approach was going to be to continue the conversation, get feedback from the council at the meeting of the 22nd. Once we have those collective comments about this list of housing opportunity sites, then we can finalize the direction to get our public review draft underway.
Okay. Would it be prudent to recommend that you add the Center Point building into the list in the event that the greater number of voices feels the issue with Eric's and some of the other ones?
So I think what we can do is for the presentation for the 22nd, we're providing a verbal summary. The staff reports for the 22nd are going to publish before this meeting is over. So,
okay.
But we will provide some additional information as to what comments were received tonight. The staff report highlights about 65 units that could come from Center Point. And so we can list that as, site number 27, let's say, added to the 26, so that we can have that conversation about those 27. I didn't hear any additional sites being proposed tonight beyond that the list that's already been put out beyond that 18 Crow Canyon Court. So, but I did hear a number of commissioners suggesting a few of those sites being removed. So that's the verbal report will come out of the to the 22nd.
All right. Any final words, commissioners? All right, staff, any final words for us? Okay, in the interest of being able to have a small break before we reconvene, I'm going to adjourn the meeting at 6:38, and we will resume, literally resume, ZOOM, at 7 o'clock. All right, bye.
Bye.